There was a scholar of the law who stood up to test Jesus and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He said in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your being, with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." He replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to that place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, 'Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back.' Which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim?" He answered, "The one who treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
It was Mark Twain who first uttered the famous line, "Truth is stranger than fiction." An author of fiction, he explained, has to stick to what at least seems possible. If you're writing a good story, it has to at least be believable. But truth has no such restrictions. Even a glance at the nightly news, the true stories you see there of sensational crimes or unexpected heroism outshine anything that you're going to find in your summer reading. There's a whole franchise out there, Ripley's Believe It or Not, that profits from the telling of strange but true stories, like the beavers whose dam saved the town from a flood, or the monkeys who kept a man alive for months in the treetops of the jungle when his parachute got caught there. Jesus was a master storyteller. He was a creator of great tales that tell us about the love of God. And today we read one of his most famous stories, the Good Samaritan. My first reaction in hearing this parable again is just how unusual and even unbelievable some of the details of this story really are. It's as if Jesus completely ignored the advice of Mark Twain when he said you have to at least be plausible in your story. For example, who could believe that a priest and a Levite, the religious officials of the time, people who are supposed to be examples of compassion, would really just leave a man to die on the side of the road? Are we really expected to believe that they would go through all the trouble of crossing to the other side of the street just to avoid meeting this man? Even if they were busy or didn't have much money, they would have at least stopped to see if the man was all right or called the ancient equivalent of 911. So are we really expected to believe this story? But then I think of the true stories I've heard recently on the news, the surveillance footage of a man who was shot and lying on a city street as person after person just walks right on by, too busy with their business to even lend him a hand. The rape victim who went door to door in her neighborhood looking for help and no one would let her in. The man who was so alone that when he died in his New York apartment, he wasn't found for over a year. His TV still turned on to the same channel as when he died. These are not made-up stories. We human beings really are capable of such cruelty and unconcern for others. As Mark Twain would say, truth is stranger than fiction. But it's not so much actually the priest and Levite that I find unbelievable. The character I find really unbelievable in this story is the Good Samaritan. His goodness is just way too over the top. For one thing, a Samaritan was part of a hated minority group. He was part of the Samaritans and the Jews had different ways of worshiping God, different customs, and there was a whole history there of war and animosity between these two peoples. So for Jesus to make a Samaritan the hero of his story would have been completely unbelievable to the Jews listening. Are they really expected to believe that a Samaritan would put aside all of the prejudice that he had learned growing up and broken that cycle of violence just to help one Jew on the road? It's hard to believe. But then I think of the story I heard recently of the armed militants in Kenya who hijacked a bus, and they went onto the bus at gunpoint and they asked every person, "Are you a Christian?" And they made people recite verses of the Quran to prove that they weren't Christian. And if anyone was found to be Christian, they were going to be taken off the bus and promptly shot. At first, it seemed like no one was going to help these poor travelers waylaid on the side of the road. But then, the Muslim passengers on the bus began to confront the militants, and they shielded the Christians with their own bodies. And they said, "We are prepared to die together. You can kill us all, or you can go home." And after a while, the militants left. Such a true story might seem unbelievable to someone who sees a Muslim as no better than a Samaritan, who paints all Muslims with a broad brush because of the violence of extremists. But that's exactly the cycle of violence that needs to be broken. We need to stop hating and marginalizing people because of a group they belong to and start seeing people as human beings who are deserving of our love and respect. The last several weeks have seen more than enough examples of the unending cycle of violence that occurs in our world when we see other people as a part of a group to be marginalized. When we treat people that way, the terrorist attacks in the Middle East, the Orlando massacre at the gay bar, the death of black unarmed men in the streets, the killing of police officers in Dallas is never going to stop until somebody stands up and acts like those Muslims on the bus, acts like the Good Samaritan, who is willing to put aside his prejudice in order to help someone, another human being made in the image and likeness of God. But it's not just that he was a Samaritan that's so hard to believe. It's the way that he just shows such incredible love and compassion to the man in a way that goes beyond anything that is reasonable. Can we really believe, and I could believe, I guess, that a Samaritan would stop and help the man, maybe bandage him up, maybe even bring him to the next town, but it's hard to believe that anyone would go through the lengths that the Good Samaritan went, of using all of his best wine and oil to soothe the man's wounds, putting him up on his own animal, walking him into town, putting him up in an inn for free of charge, spending days tending the man, and then when he finally had to leave, giving all his money to the innkeeper and saying, "I will pay any price but take care of this man until I return." Who would go to such lengths? Who would do something like that? This story is getting hard to believe. But then I think of how I was once in that same situation. I was once wounded and dying in my sins, cast out of the heavenly Jerusalem. I was waylaid by the devil, the robber of my soul, and I was unable to help myself. I was wounded and damaged in my sins. And somebody came and helped me. Jesus came and helped me. And he lifted me up from that place, and he set me on his own shoulders. He healed the wounds of my sin. He poured in the wine and the oil of the sacraments. He brought me to the inn of the church where I could find rest. He was willing to pay any price, even the price of his own life, so that I could be whole and healed again until he returns. Then I remember that, yes, someone is indeed capable of being that kind and compassionate. Jesus is. As Mark Twain would say, truth is stranger than fiction. Is my love for others a true love, like Jesus's? Like the Good Samaritans? Or is it merely a fictional love? Something that's a product of my own imagination, a story that I tell myself to feel better. Dorothy Day once said that we only really love God as much as the person that we love the least. I really only love God as much as the person that I love the least. Who is the Samaritan? Who is the Muslim? Who is the stranger, the other in my life, the person who is farthest from me? Dorothy Day would say, I love God as much as I love that person. A powerful and uncomfortable challenge for those of us who too easily say, oh yeah, I love God and neighbor, without being willing to do the hard work and the sacrifice and the forgiveness and the reconciliation that true love always demands. Maybe that's why Mark Twain also once said, the parts of the Bible I don't understand don't trouble me nearly as much as the parts of the Bible I do.